The sterile hallways of the Senate Hart Office building had witnessed many heated exchanges over the decades, but nothing quite prepared the gathered senators, medical experts, and media observers for what was about to unfold in Committee Room 216. The Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee had convened for what was billed as a routine hearing on public health preparedness and response, but everyone knew this was really about one thing: the growing tide of vaccine misinformation that was threatening America's public health infrastructure. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. walked into the committee room that Tuesday morning, carrying a thick manila folder stuffed with printouts, highlighted articles, and what he believed was an arsenal of evidence that would finally expose what he called the vaccine industrial complex. The folder was heavy with Facebook posts from anti-vaccine groups, blog articles from discredited researchers, and cherry-picked data from studies that had been debunked years ago. Sitting calmly at the witness table, Dr. Anthony Fauci watched this circus of misinformation enter the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 5 decades building one of the most distinguished careers in medical science. On the table in front of him sat a neat stack of peer-reviewed journals, CDC epidemiological reports, and clinical trial data that represented the collective wisdom of the global medical community. What happened in the next 12 minutes didn't just destroy RFK Jr.'s anti-vaccine arguments. It became a masterclass in how real science dismantles conspiracy theories and why peer-reviewed research matters more than social media posts when people's lives are on the line. But before we dive into this incredible confrontation, hit that like button and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of scientific integrity and evidence-based medicine that we need to see more of in America. Trust me, you won't want to miss how a true medical expert handles someone who confuses Facebook research with actual science. To understand the magnitude of what happened that day, you need to know who these two men really were and why this confrontation represented something much bigger than a simple disagreement about vaccines. Dr. Anthony Fauci had spent his entire adult life in service to medical science and public health. After graduating from Holy Cross College and Cornell University Medical College, he joined the National Institutes of Health in 1968 as a clinical associate in the Laboratory of Clinical Investigation. What followed was a career that would span 5 decades and touch virtually every major public health crisis America had faced. Fauci's early work focused on immune-mediated and infectious diseases. He made groundbreaking contributions to understanding how the human immune system works, publishing over 1,300 peer-reviewed articles that have been cited more than any other scientist in the field. His research on immune regulation and inflammatory diseases earned him recognition as one of the world's leading immunologists long before most Americans knew his name. But it was the AIDS crisis that truly established Fauci as a medical hero. When HIV/AIDS emerged in the early 1980s, Fauci pivoted his entire research program to focus on this mysterious and deadly new disease. He worked tirelessly to understand the virus, develop treatments, and coordinate the national research response. His work contributed directly to the development of antiretroviral therapies that have saved millions of lives worldwide. Throughout his career, Fauci had published in the most prestigious medical journals: the New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, Nature, Science. Every article had undergone rigorous peer review, where other leading scientists scrutinized his methodology, verified his data, and challenged his conclusions. This was how real science worked, through a careful process of research, review, and replication that ensured accuracy and reliability. As director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984, Fauci had overseen a research budget of over $6 billion annually, funding thousands of studies that advanced human knowledge about infectious diseases, vaccines, and immune system function. He had advised 7 presidents, testified before Congress hundreds of times, and earned virtually every major award in medical science. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., by contrast, had taken a very different path to this moment. Born into America's most famous political family, he had indeed attended Harvard Law School and built a respectable career as an environmental lawyer. His early work on clean water and river conservation had earned genuine praise and demonstrated real legal skill. But sometime in the mid-2000s, Kennedy had taken a sharp turn toward anti-vaccine activism. It started with his belief that thimerosal, a mercury-containing preservative used in some vaccines, was causing autism in children. Despite overwhelming scientific evidence showing no link between vaccines and autism, Kennedy became convinced that a massive conspiracy involving pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, and medical professionals was covering up vaccine dangers. Kennedy's research consisted mainly of collecting information from anti-vaccine websites, discredited studies, and personal anecdotes from parents who believed vaccines had harmed their children. He had no medical training, no experience conducting clinical research, and no understanding of epidemiology or immunology. But he had something that gave him a platform, a famous name, and the ability to speak persuasively to audiences who were already suspicious of government and medical authorities. By the time he walked into that Senate committee room, Kennedy had become the de facto leader of the anti-vaccine movement in America. His organization, Children's Health Defense, spread vaccine misinformation through social media, published books filled with debunked claims, and organized rallies where speakers compared vaccine mandates to Nazi persecution. The hearing had been called ostensibly to discuss pandemic preparedness, but everyone knew it was really about addressing the growing influence of vaccine misinformation on public health policy. Senator Rand Paul, a physician himself who had often clashed with Fauci during COVID-19, had specifically requested that Kennedy be invited to testify alongside Fauci. The committee room was packed with medical professionals, public health experts, and anti-vaccine activists. C-SPAN cameras captured every moment as the two men took their seats at the witness table, representing not just different viewpoints, but entirely different approaches to understanding truth and evidence. Chairman Bernie Sanders opened the hearing with remarks about the importance of evidence-based medicine and the danger of misinformation. But everyone was waiting for the inevitable confrontation between the nation's top infectious disease expert and its most prominent vaccine skeptic. Kennedy was called to testify first. He had clearly prepared extensively, though his preparation consisted mainly of organizing the collection of misleading information he had gathered from anti-vaccine sources over the years. He approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who believed he was about to expose a massive conspiracy. "Thank you, Chairman Sanders," Kennedy began, his famous family's oratorical skills evident in his delivery. "I want to start by saying that I am not anti-vaccine. I am pro-safe vaccine. And the evidence I'm about to present shows that the medical establishment, led by Dr. Fauci and the NIH, has systematically hidden the truth about vaccine injuries from the American people." He opened his thick folder and began pulling out printouts. "This study shows a clear link between vaccines and autism," he said, holding up a highlighted article. "This data demonstrates that vaccinated children have higher rates of chronic illness than unvaccinated children. This research proves that the CDC has manipulated vaccine safety data." For 20 minutes, Kennedy presented his case with the passion of a prosecutor laying out evidence of a crime. He cited study after study, statistic after statistic, all of which seemed to support his claims about vaccine dangers. To someone unfamiliar with scientific methodology, it might have seemed convincing. Dr. Fauci sat quietly during Kennedy's presentation, occasionally taking notes but showing no visible reaction to the accusations being leveled against him and the medical establishment he represented. Those who knew Fauci recognized the expression. It was the same calm he had shown during countless congressional hearings, the same professional demeanor he maintained even when facing the most outrageous attacks on his integrity. When Kennedy finished his presentation and it was Fauci's turn to respond, the room fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The confrontation between evidence-based medicine and conspiracy theory, between peer-reviewed science and Facebook research. Fauci adjusted his microphone and looked directly at Kennedy. His voice was calm, professorial, but carried the authority of someone who had spent 5 decades mastering his field. "Mr. Kennedy," he began, "I've listened carefully to your presentation, and I think it's important for this committee and the American people to understand the difference between real scientific evidence and the misinformation you've just shared." He picked up one of the articles Kennedy had cited. "You mentioned this study as evidence of a link between vaccines and autism. Let me tell you about this study. It was published in 1998 by Dr. Andrew Wakefield in The Lancet. It has since been retracted by the journal because the research was fraudulent. Dr. Wakefield lost his medical license. The study involved only 12 children, had no control group, and used methodology that violated basic scientific standards. Kennedy tried to interrupt, but Fauci continued with the methodical precision of a scientist laying out facts. This study has been investigated and debunked by dozens of subsequent studies involving hundreds of thousands of children. The scientific consensus based on multiple large-scale epidemiological studies is clear. There is no link between vaccines and autism. He set down the first article and picked up another. You cited this paper as evidence that vaccinated children have more chronic illness than unvaccinated children. This was a telephone survey, not a peer-reviewed study. It was conducted by an anti-vaccine organization with no medical credentials. The methodology was so flawed that no legitimate medical journal would publish it. Fauci's voice was gaining strength now, not with anger, but with the confidence of someone who had the weight of scientific evidence on his side. Mr. Kennedy, you've built your entire anti-vaccine campaign on studies that have been retracted, debunked, or never peer-reviewed in the first place. You're asking this committee and the American people to ignore decades of rigorous scientific research based on Facebook posts and blog articles. He opened one of the journals in front of him. Let me tell you what real evidence looks like. This is a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine involving 657,000 children. It found no association between MMR vaccination and autism. This study underwent rigorous peer review by leading experts in epidemiology and pediatrics before publication. Kennedy attempted to respond. Dr. Fauci, you're ignoring the thousands of parents who know their children were injured by vaccines. Fauci cut him off with the authority of someone who understood the difference between anecdote and evidence. Mr. Kennedy, personal anecdotes, no matter how heartfelt, are not scientific evidence. Science requires controlled studies, statistical analysis, and peer review precisely because human perception and memory can be unreliable. That's why we don't base medical policy on individual stories, but on carefully conducted research involving large populations. He pulled out another journal. This is a meta-analysis published in the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, the gold standard for medical evidence synthesis. It analyzed data from 1.2 million children across multiple countries. The conclusion? Vaccines are safe and effective, with serious adverse events occurring at rates far lower than the diseases they prevent. The contrast in the room was stark. Kennedy's folder of printouts and highlighted blog posts looked increasingly flimsy next to Fauci's stack of peer-reviewed journals representing the consensus of the global medical community. You talk about vaccine injuries, Mr. Kennedy, Fauci continued. Let me tell you about real injuries. Before the measles vaccine, measles killed 500 children every year in the United States and caused brain damage in many more. Before the polio vaccine, polio paralyzed thousands of children annually. Before the Hib vaccine, Haemophilus influenza type B was the leading cause of bacterial meningitis in children. His voice was rising now, not with anger, but with the passion of someone who had devoted his life to preventing human suffering. Vaccines have prevented more death and disability than any other medical intervention in human history except clean water. They have saved tens of millions of lives globally. And you want to undermine that achievement based on discredited studies and conspiracy theories? Kennedy tried to regain control of the narrative. Dr. Fauci, you're funded by pharmaceutical companies. You have financial conflicts of interest. This accusation seemed to strike a nerve, not because it was true, but because it represented the kind of ad hominem attack that conspiracy theorists use when they can't argue with the evidence. Mr. Kennedy, Fauci said, his voice now carrying 5 decades of accumulated authority, I have never received personal payment from any pharmaceutical company. My salary comes from the American taxpayers. The NIH funding I oversee goes to academic institutions and research hospitals, not to me personally. He leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more pointed. But let's talk about conflicts of interest. You make money selling books that spread vaccine misinformation. Your organization solicits donations based on fear of vaccines. You profit from the very conspiracy theories you promote. Who exactly has the financial conflict of interest here? The room was completely silent now. Even Kennedy's supporters seemed stunned by the systematic dismantling of their hero's arguments. But Fauci wasn't finished. He had spent too many years watching preventable diseases return because of vaccine hesitancy, too many sleepless nights during the COVID-19 pandemic, dealing with people who refused life-saving vaccines because of misinformation. Mr. Kennedy, you talk about being pro-safe vaccine, but your actions tell a different story. You have promoted conspiracy theories that have led parents to refuse vaccines for their children. You have spread misinformation that contributed to measles outbreaks in communities with low vaccination rates. You have undermined confidence in COVID-19 vaccines during a pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans. He picked up a thick folder of his own, not printouts from the internet, but official public health data. Because of vaccine misinformation like what you spread, we've seen outbreaks of diseases that were nearly eliminated. Measles cases have increased in areas where your message has taken hold. Children have died from diseases that vaccines could have prevented. That is the real consequence of your pro-safe vaccine activism. Kennedy looked shaken now. The confident demeanor he had carried into the room was cracking under the weight of actual scientific evidence and moral authority. You compare vaccine mandates to Nazi persecution, Fauci continued, referencing some of Kennedy's more inflammatory rhetoric. As someone whose career has been devoted to protecting human life and health, I find that comparison not just offensive, but dangerous. Vaccines are not persecution, they are protection. They are one of humanity's greatest achievements in preventing suffering and death. He closed the journal he had been reading from and looked directly at Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, you have every right to your opinions, but you do not have the right to your own facts. And when your opinions endanger public health, when they lead parents to make decisions that put children at risk, when they undermine confidence in life-saving medical interventions, then those of us who understand the science have an obligation to speak up. The silence in the room was deafening. Kennedy sat there, his folder of printouts suddenly looking like what they were, a collection of misinformation and debunked claims that had no place in a serious discussion of public health policy. Senator Sanders, clearly moved by Fauci's response, leaned into his microphone. Dr. Fauci, thank you for that clarification. I think you've made it very clear what the difference is between scientific evidence and misinformation. Other senators began asking questions, but the real confrontation was over. Kennedy had brought Facebook research to a scientific gunfight, and the result was predictable. His anti-vaccine arguments lay in ruins, dismantled piece by someone who actually understood how science works. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Videos of Fauci's systematic dismantling of Kennedy's arguments went viral within hours. Medical professionals across the country shared clips of the exchange, praising Fauci for defending evidence-based medicine. Public health schools began incorporating the hearing transcript into their curricula as an example of how to combat medical misinformation. The hashtag #FactsNotFacebook began trending, with users sharing the contrast between Kennedy's internet printouts and Fauci's peer-reviewed journals. Medical students created memes showing the difference between real research and conspiracy theories. The confrontation became a teaching moment about the importance of scientific literacy in evaluating health information. Major medical organizations issued statements supporting Fauci's defense of vaccine science. The American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Public Health Association all praised his clear explanation of how peer review works and why it matters for public health policy. For Kennedy, the consequences were immediate and severe. Several prominent anti-vaccine activists distanced themselves from his more extreme claims. Speaking engagements were canceled. His book sales plummeted as people began to understand that his arguments were based on discredited research and conspiracy theories rather than legitimate science. More importantly, the confrontation had broader implications for public health communication. Medical professionals who had been reluctant to directly confront vaccine misinformation saw Fauci's approach as a model for how to respond to conspiracy theories with facts, evidence, and moral authority. Public health departments across the country began developing communication strategies based on Fauci's method. Acknowledge the misinformation directly, explain why it's wrong using specific evidence, and contrast false claims with legitimate scientific research. The approach proved far more effective than simply ignoring conspiracy theories or hoping they would go away. The hearing also sparked important conversations about scientific literacy and the role of expertise in democratic decision-making. Education experts noted that many Americans lack the basic scientific knowledge needed to distinguish between legitimate research and misinformation, making them vulnerable to charismatic conspiracy theorists like Kennedy. Medical schools began expanding their curricula to include training on science communication and combating misinformation. Public health programs added courses on how to effectively communicate complex scientific information to lay audiences. The goal was to prepare the next generation of health professionals to deal with the information challenges of the digital age. Perhaps most importantly, the confrontation reminded Americans why scientific expertise matters. In an era when anyone with an internet connection could claim to be a researcher, Fauci's response demonstrated the difference between actual knowledge and the illusion of knowledge that comes from reading misleading information online. The contrast between Kennedy's folder of printouts and Fauci's peer-reviewed journals became a powerful visual metaphor for the difference between real science and fake research. Medical educators began using images from the hearing to teach students about the importance of source evaluation and critical thinking. Young medical professionals particularly embraced Fauci's approach as a model for how to maintain scientific integrity under pressure. His calm, methodical dismantling of misinformation while maintaining respect for the scientific process became required viewing in many medical training programs. International health organizations also took note of the exchange. The World Health Organization included clips from the hearing and materials designed to help health officials combat vaccine misinformation globally. The confrontation became an example of how expertise and evidence could be used effectively against organized disinformation campaigns. As one epidemiologist wrote in the Journal of Public Health, Dr. Fauci didn't just defeat Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s arguments. He demonstrated how scientific integrity can prevail over misinformation when experts are willing to engage directly with false claims using evidence and moral authority. The lesson was clear. In the battle between science and conspiracy theory, facts matter more than Facebook posts, peer review matters more than political rhetoric, and 50 years of medical expertise matters more than a famous last name. Sometimes it takes a real scientist to remind everyone what the difference between knowledge and opinion actually means. If this story inspired you like it inspired millions of Americans who believe in evidence-based medicine, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with everyone who needs to see what real scientific authority looks like. This is exactly the kind of expertise and integrity that protects public health and saves lives. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Dr. Fauci's incredible response. And don't forget to check out our other videos about the real heroes who are defending scientific truth in America. The lesson was unforgettable. In America, peer-reviewed science trumps Facebook research every time. But sometimes it takes a medical legend to remind everyone what evidence-based medicine really means. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. All events, conversations, and scenarios depicted are completely imaginary. Any resemblance to real people, events, or situations is purely coincidental. This content does not represent actual news or factual reporting.